Привет, moi друзі. Hello, my friends. Today is day 353 in this terrible war in Ukraine. My name is Gerdes, and I have been bringing these daily updates since day 85, and I just try to help you see behind the news. Generally, I don't talk about the battle map and that kind of thing. Today, I'll talk a little bit more about what's going on the battlefield, but generally, I try to help you understand what's going on through the eyes of leaders as they're doing what they're doing and why they're doing what they're doing. Today, it looks like it would be inappropriate to skip what's going on the battlefield. After months of stalemate, it looks like Russia's long-feared new offensive in Ukraine has begun, but it hasn't begun like what we thought, like there's going to be this massive push toward that. It looks like they're just attacking those points where they've already been skirmishing, which is somewhat perplexing to me, but a lot of this is somewhat perplexing to me. Russia has begun its long-promised war escalation in eastern Ukraine. According to one of Ukraine's eastern military commanders, we can conclude that a certain escalation has already begun, said Serhii Haidai. Remember, he was the guy in Severodonetsk and Lysychansk that was our biggest point of information back in July. Russian attacks have intensified around attempts to move westwards from Kreminna. Okay, so this is a place that the Ukrainians have been attacking. Well, the Russians are counterattacking there in a pretty significant way. And I don't know why they chose their attack to be like counterattacks in a few dispersed places as opposed to one massive thrust, but search me. Ukrainian forces have repulsed a large number of attacks there. Let's go on to the ISW and see what they had to say. Recent footage of a failed Russian assault near Vuhledar, Donetsk Oblast, has become the latest point of pain, essentially. Neuralgia is a sharp pain in the Russian information space. Russian mill bloggers claim that the Russian commanders who oversaw the highly attritional assaults of the 155th Naval Infantry Brigade on near Vuhledar in November are responsible for the effort to capture Vuhledar, and argued that the video illustrates these commanders continue to make the same costly mistakes. But it's not just the commanders. The commanders are making some mistakes, but they also have untrained troops. So there's like no there's no positive side. The commanders aren't that swift, and the troops are even worse. Footage shows that the Russian forces are engaging in highly dysfunctional tactics that are far more indicative of the fact that the 155th Naval Infantry Brigade is likely comprised of poorly trained mobilized personnel than of poor command. So it could be both, but it's at least poor training that is making it such a costly battle for the Russians. Okay, this is Radio Free Europe. Look at the headline: more than 100 or 1,100 Russian dead in the past 24 hours. And I've seen over 1,000 a few times in recent days, and I'm like, what's going on? Like, you would think that's overinflated, but then when you read the articles, you're like, I can see how that would be. February 11th claimed that Russian military losses in Ukraine in the past day topped 1,000. Kyiv had been expecting a new Russian military offensive. Putin is scheduled to deliver his delayed annual address to Parliament on February 21st. Okay, that's all I'm going to show you from this article, but I want to stop there. So Kyiv's been expecting this new Russian military offensive. They don't have their act together. They're not hitting a particular place that, is going to be strategic and whatever. They're just trying to get a win. Why are they trying to get a win? February 21st. Why does February 21st matter? I thought we were talking about February 24th. Well, where did Putin, this is February 21st, 2022, give his address where he was basically laying out his case about what was going to have to happen moving forward before he actually attacked? Right? It was February 21st. So this is, I think, the day that Putin's really going for instead of February 24th. Yes, he wants to see progress by the 24th as well, but that's the day of his annual address. Okay, Russia's new offensive grinds into action as Ukraine punches back hard. Okay, that new offensive now appears to be underway with Russian forces in eastern Ukraine building on months of intense localized assault in several places in an effort to regain momentum. So wherever those places were, Bakhmut and Vuhledar and other places, that's where they're fighting. They're just really extra supporting those particular positions and in hope to get a victory at one of them. Putin has shuffled commanders at least 3 times. That's generally not a good sign. And when you scroll down a little bit, by the way, look at this map. This map has hardly changed since October, like very little change since the Ukrainian counteroffensive. Okay, Kreminna, Soledar, Bakhmut, and add Vuhledar to that. Vuhledar is actually in this list on the smaller list, and that's essentially where the action is. A little bit further down, there's heavy fighting near Bakhmut. One Russian military blogger wrote, judging by the introduction of a new brigade, the enemy, that's the Ukrainians, have decided to hold the city to the end to prevent it from being surrounded. He said, referring to the Ukrainian forces, and he's ready to pay a high price for this. Wagner is in for a tough fight. Well, Wagner's paying a pretty tough, high price for this as well. U.S. officials last month estimated that of the 50,000 Wagner personnel deployed in Ukraine, as many as 40,000 were convicts. Like, I doubt that the convicts had really good training. They're just kind of thrown into the fight, and that's part of what's causing some of these extra casualties, let alone the poor training of the Russian military that's being thrown into the fight. Western military officials estimate that Russia may now have as many as 330,000 regular troops, regular forces, elite units, Wagner troops, convicts, mobilized men on the ground in Ukraine as its winter offensive gets underway. So really you're looking at almost double what you had in the first iteration of this 1 year ago, is ready to fight. Well, I wouldn't say ready to fight, is on the ground in Ukraine. Whether they're ready to fight is a whole different story, and that's going to make a big difference. You have battle-hardened Ukrainian troops, and you have these guys that are just like, get out there and go do something, and that's not going to go well for them. This is what the battle map looks like. Closer look at the losses of the Russian forces in Vuhledar, and you see the destroyed tanks. There were 30 tanks either like abandoned yesterday, and so yeah, it's bad for the Russians. It's not working well. This was a curious story. Russia is draining a massive Ukrainian reservoir, endangering a nuclear power plant. And it's not just a nuclear power plant, but you see the satellite images were showing this. The pictures on the ground are showing the reservoir is going down. Russia appears to be draining an enormous reservoir in Ukraine, imperiling drinking water, agricultural production, and safety at Europe's largest nuclear power plant, according to satellite data. And so that's like what the water level was and how it's changed significantly recently. And again, at stake is drinking water for hundreds of thousands of residents, irrigation, and the nuclear power plant. And so I'm not sure that I understand why they're doing what they're doing, but they're doing it. Moldovan president resigns, blaming crises caused by Russian aggression for the resignation. She's a pro-Western government prime minister, and she's resigned after 18 months in power. The intelligence service said on Thursday that Russia was acting to destabilize the country. Volodymyr Zelensky said, he explained this. I talked about that yesterday in the video. And so she just finally resigned. EU leaders accepted Moldova's membership candidate last year, a diplomatic triumph for her. Russia, however, has troops in Transnistria. So it's a difficult time for her. Moldova would have been next. Had Ukraine just folded like a cheap chair, Moldova, we'd be talking about Moldova right now rather than just what was happening on the ground in Ukraine. In other news, Biden is to travel to Poland. I can't really tell you much more about this other than he's about to travel to Poland ahead of the first anniversary of Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Now, that's a good sign. Over the last few days, I've spent a lot of time talking about this. I've talked about why symbolism is important, the power of reputation. I've talked about why the balloon incident mattered, because it was a matter of credibility. And that's why Biden is going to be going to Poland. It's reputation, symbolism, the power of credibility, backing your promises. It's also why we had a balloon or object or something, an unidentified object shot down over Alaska yesterday. Why was that? Because they learned their lesson about credibility. Like, there was a lot in the U.S. press about, like, how are you just letting this happen, this Chinese balloon? And we don't know what this thing is, but an unidentified object was shot down 10 miles off the frozen coast of Alaska on Friday afternoon. Asked about the operation on Friday, President Joe Biden told CNN it was a success. He's not making the same mistake twice, and I applaud him for that. I don't applaud him for a lot of things, but how he's been learning and trying not to make the same mistake again, I appreciate. Biden was first briefed on the object on Thursday evening as soon as the Pentagon had enough information. We're calling this an object because that's the best description we have right now, said John Kirby. We don't know who owns it, whether it's a state-owned or corporate or privately owned. We just don't know, but they're not taking chances. They're not going to roll the dice again like they did before and then kind of have a bad image before the world. Times of India was saying that the U.S. will welcome any effort by Prime Minister Modi, the Prime Minister of India, to stop Russia-Ukraine war. If he can intervene and say, look, you got to do something about this, great, we're open to it. What they're not open to is, Ukraine rolling over. And, of course, that's not going to be part of the package. But it is time for fun with Russian state media. And in this, Russia is explaining its stance on peace talks with Ukraine. Russia remains ready for peace talks with Ukraine, but these should take place with no preconditions and ought to account for realities on the ground. What they're saying is, we're going to ignore Zelensky's 10-point peace plan. We're going to ignore that we would actually have to get out of Ukraine, and we're going to be open to any peace talks where we get everything that we want and you get nothing that you want. That's essentially what it comes down to. Russia and Ukraine haven't met at the negotiating table since Zelensky signed a decree in autumn officially banning him from any dialogue with Putin, because why does it matter? Like, Putin's not going to actually do anything, not like what Ukraine needs him to do. The Ukrainian leader is currently pushing forward with his 10-point peace plan, which, among other things, calls for Russian forces to withdraw to borders claimed by Ukraine, to pay reparations, and to submit to war crimes tribunals. And, of course, Russia is not going to do that, so it'll be settled on the battlefield. Okay, the U.S. defense official flags no objections to Kyiv attacking Crimea. Now, to Russia, or the way that this is going to be presented in Russia, is that that's going to be attacking the motherland. Well, it's disputed territory. So the U.S. would have no objections to Ukrainian forces striking targets inside Crimea with American-supplied weapons, a senior defense official has said on Friday. That's escalation! Well, yeah, but hold on. As long as Ukraine identifies operational value in targeting Russian forces on Ukrainian territory, we don't have objections and do not seek to limit Ukrainian military objectives to achieve their objectives. Now, one of the RT articles I did not show you just yesterday, it just didn't fit, right? So I make a lot of decisions about, hey, this fits, this is important, this meets the theme, this is what they need to know. And it was talking about how, well, the U.S. is calling out all the shots, and then when you look at a Western article, it's like saying the U.S. is working with Ukrainians, making sure that they're targeting appropriate targets. But it wasn't like that the U.S. is saying, shoot there, shoot there, shoot there. It's the U.S. is making sure that those HIMARS strikes are counting, because they're using their satellite imagery and intelligence in order to make sure that they're actually hitting the stuff that they ought to be hitting. But if you read it in RT, you would think that it was just the U.S. behind pulling the strings, the Ukrainian puppet, and that's not what it was. Okay, let's look at what was going on 1 year ago today. So here we see an article, U.S. warns of distinct possibility Russia will invade Ukraine within days. Okay, this is February 11th, 2022, and they're showing, yeah, it's very distinct possibility of a Russian invasion of Ukraine in the next few days, said Biden. A little bit further down, Vice Admiral Niels Andres Stetsones, the head of Norwegian intelligence service, said Russia now had 150,000 troops massed around Ukraine, and said the decision on whether to attack rested with Vladimir Putin. He added that Russians will have all that they need to carry everything out, from a minor invasion in the east to minor attacks here and there in Ukraine to a complete invasion with possibly an occupation of all or parts of Ukraine. Like he actually nailed it. Like, that's what they were planning to do, but none of us could believe it. Like, we just couldn't wrap our minds around, like, Putin wouldn't do that. Like, he wants to get his concessions and then he'll go away, but he wouldn't do that. Okay, but he would do that. Next article. This is in Reuters. This one, the U.S. Next article in Reuters, U.S. and its allies tell citizens to leave Ukraine as Russia could invade at any time. Okay, so this is the actual briefing of that. The United States and its allies urged their citizens to leave Ukraine right away and avoid a Russian invasion, including possible air assault that Washington said could occur, said on Friday could occur at any time. Now, get this. Moscow accused Western nations of spreading lies to distract from their own aggressive acts. Really? After Sullivan's briefing at the White House, Russia's deputy UN ambassador, Polanski, appeared to mock his comments. Some reasonable people were hoping U.S. fan hysteria was waning, he posted on Twitter. Maybe they put a jinx on it because scaremongers have clearly got a second wind. Our troops are still in our territory, and I wonder if the U.S. will invade Ukraine itself. Someone has to, after such a panic campaign. He really said that. I mean, it's just amazing. So from the beginning, from before the beginning, the Russians were lying. So just understand that's how they do. Okay, now there's a great comment here. Stephen Cole 9387, he said, watching this video now, he's talking about my interview with Orst, not the interview on Orst's channel, and I would urge you to go to that. The interview that I had with Orst yesterday on his channel was, we were talking about is what's happening in Ukraine, an extension of the Cold War, and we're talking about some of the nuances within that, and we've really gotten some thick stuff in that. The interview that I have with Orst today, I just put out a few hours ago, it was what it's like to live in wartime Ukraine. So I'm asking him, like, before the war, what happened? What did you see? What did you expect? You know, like when it happened, like, what were you thinking? What about a month in? How about 6 months in? Like, how has your thinking progressed since you're actually living there? He said, watching this video now, tomorrow is the anniversary of the U.S. bugging out of the embassy in Kyiv. Imagine if the U.S. had announced that we are staying and announcing that an attack on the embassy will be regarded as an attack on the United States. You guys are both heroes for shifting gears and concentrating on what is truly important, and some Ukrainian something I can't pronounce, but I will translate and figure out. And so, yeah, so thank you, Stephen. Yeah, that's right. We're trying to just get a sense of like the enormity of this by looking back a year ago today. All right, thank you so much. If you got some value out of this, share, subscribe, give me a thumbs up, leave a comment. And if you want to help in the cause, you can give to United 24. Actually, you know what? If you go to the Ars video at the very end, I'm asking him like what you can do, and he had some really interesting examples, like where he's become a conduit to a lot of Ukrainian supplies of like Starlinks to the front lines and things along those lines. So you definitely want to watch that video. Thank you for your time, and thank you for being the kind of person that cares about Ukraine.